Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode number 45. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back. If you're looking for more information about the podcast, past guests, or want to catch up on previous episodes, or just want to drop me a line, it's all at the website, desertladydiaries.com. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries and on Twitter as Desert Lady Diary. In this episode, Barbie Sommars explains how her decision to use marijuana to help relieve debilitating pain turned into a mission to educate and inform. Welcome back to Desert Lady Diaries. I'm here today with Barbie Sommars. She is the COO of Fairie Jane University. She is a cannabis consultant who brings over 20 years of corporate operations experience to Fairie Jane University with a background in high net worth asset management. After a medical diagnosis in 2008, she sought alternative ways of healing and pain management and found cannabis. From patient to activist to educator, she now resides in the beautiful Mojave Desert near Joshua Tree and commits herself to a life of healing, activism, and education to restore this ancient healing herb to its rightful place. Barbie is the chief experience creator of High Dining, where she takes fine dining to new heights with upscale events infused with cannabis and education, and the president of Fairie Jane, a cannabis lifestyle brand that celebrates activism through the art of adornment. She's also the founding co-chair of the Women Grow Orange County chapter, and she received the Excellence in Experiences Award from Green State for her Moonlight Movable Feast. And if you could see the table in front of me right now, it's piled with beautiful, interesting cannabis-related items that we may or may not get to talk about, but we probably will. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So as I always ask, what was your very first experience with the desert?
Well, Pappy and Harriet brought me to the desert. A Graham Rabbit show, to be specific. And that must have been, I'd say, in 2007. It was one of the Halloween shows.
I haven't actually even experienced Graham Rabbit because they're not a thing anymore, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I've experienced Jessica Von Rabbit, but I haven't experienced that, so I missed out.
It was quite a to-do. And they took over Pappy and Harriet. They called Pappy and Scariots. And I brought two girlfriends with me, talked them into coming out here. We stayed at an Airbnb that was on Main Street in Pioneer Town with a teepee. And all of that was fabulous. The music was amazing, the costumes, the teepee. But the stars. Yeah. That's really just what stopped me in my tracks. And just looking up, because I live in a city before that. I had light pollution. So yes, I started spending much of my free time. Sometimes I would even come out by myself and rent a room at the Pioneer Town Motel, go back and forth between Pappy's. And I'm just amazed at how this whole, not only like the music scene, but also the population has grown.
Right. Now, when was that you ended up actually then moving after all these experiences and coming to visit?
I only moved here 3 years ago. So I was coming out here with much of my free time in between, all of my free time.
So what was that moment that happened that you were thinking, I can't stop coming here. I need to move here? What was that like?
There are different phases of that. I almost went in on an apartment with someone so that I could have some place to crash here when I was here. I started to have other friends moving out here, and they were telling me how affordable things were. I thought, well, what am I doing paying $2,600 a month to rent a house in Long Beach? I got a 3-bedroom, 2-car garage for $950, and I thought I was a genius. It was on Sunset here in Joshua Tree, or Sunburst. Anyhow, I felt smart, but then I started to talk to friends who actually owned, and they told me how cheap their mortgage was, and I was like, I'm still dumb. So anyhow, I bought 5 acres in Landers on an auction. And I cashed out my 401k. I scraped together everything, and my mom helped me. My ex-boyfriend helped me. And I got the house.
That's
amazing.
I
have the most beautiful view of the eastern sky, and I can also see the Integratron from my porch.
Oh, that's a beautiful view. When you were coming up here, how long would you say you were coming up here between that moment at Pappy and Harriet's, like, wow, look at the sky, and then your trips in between? How long was it from your first time here to permanent?
7 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, mine was like 3 months. I couldn't wait to get here.
I still had a job back then. I was working a corporate job, and I didn't leave that until 2012.
Okay. I would say usually I ask people when you moved here, how did you find your community? But it sounds like during that 7 years, you probably spent enough time here to start to go to places and meet people and all that kind of stuff. What kind of things were happening that you went to and where you met people?
Well, Robbie Rob and Crippa are a big part of my story.
Okay.
And Crippa's been on your...
She hasn't yet.
Oh.
Nope, not yet.
Hopefully soon. I'm Rita Crippa. So that's where I would stay. They have a trailer on their property, so quite a bit. And so I was very much involved in their community and going to events at Bobby First for many years. It's mostly the music community, I would say, I'm more connected to.
A lot of the socializing that happens is typically around music events, I'm finding. Yeah.
And funnily enough, after I moved here, I went out much less. Yes, there's that desert solitude, but I think most people that move out here go through some sort of transition. The desert changes you.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes it is the perfect place to be very introspective. Yeah, I kind of hermited it up for a few years.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think probably more people could use that, actually.
I reveled in it, actually. Yeah. Sometimes you feel like you're crazy. And one of the things I do love to say is this is a place to lose yourself and find yourself. And I think I've done it many times over.
When I first moved here, somebody was saying, well, people either they're running to the desert to get away from something or they're running towards something. So I think that kind of plays into what you were just saying. Very similar feeling. Were there any kind of crazy things that happened that you weren't expecting from a desert living perspective or learning how to live in this landscape?
Not while I lived in Joshua Tree, but Landers...
It's a little wilder out here.
I do call Landers the Wild West. I mean, not only are the crime reports kind of crazy to read, but it's just different. And I don't have a car on a regular basis. And I only mention that because that has caused me to have an even deeper connection to the desert because I sometimes walk places.
Yeah.
And in Landers, things are far from each other.
Yeah, you're walking
and there's not
far.
even that many things to go to anyway.
No, the thrift store, the Landers Brew, the post office, the Integratron.
I can walk to... Yeah, I actually used to work at the Landers Brew, and I would walk there.
Yeah. Did your cannabis business start here in the desert, or did that journey start before you came to the desert?
That journey began before. That's how I came to be the founding co-chair of the Orange County Women Grow chapter, which was originally a Long Beach chapter. I lived in Long Beach prior to moving here. I was very active in the community there, and I'm not only a cannabis activist, I'm also an environment activist, and I was the lady sitting outside of the farmers market educating people about GMO labeling and trying to get them to vote Prop 37. And cannabis is part of my story, and I feel that cannabis, that green argument of being green eco-friendly or green because you're cannabis, to me is the same thing. And I know that cannabis is the sexy side of this burgeoning industry, but where it's at is hemp. Hemp really
that was
can
one
have
of my
such
questions.
A beautiful impact.
Yeah, to decipher between what all that means. When somebody hears hemp versus somebody hears marijuana versus somebody hears cannabis, how does that all tie together?
Well, they are all tied together by the same genus, Cannabis sativa. I like to make it easy for people. I like to separate it between the definitions of high resin plants, which is cannabis, and low resin plants, which is hemp. So people aren't growing hemp to get high. They're very low resin flowers. That's grown for its fiber. And hemp was used for fiber and fuel and all kinds of other things well before Reefer Madness, and we made things scary for people. So in my bio, the reason I say I want to restore this ancient healing herb to its rightful place is I like to remind people that mankind has been using this for thousands and thousands of years. And we had a little hiccup in the 30s from some confused people. Well, no, they weren't confused. They had an agenda, and it actually wasn't about getting high. It was more about the hemp industry. Oh, there's lots of conspiracy. That's a whole other show.
Okay. What was it that drew you to become so active and passionate about this product?
I would say the effect that it had on me personally and my health. I didn't really grow up being a stoner. And many of my friends in the industry are. I mean, many of my friends in general are. Mm-hmm. I just used to prefer alcohol more. Mm-hmm. And I actually quit drinking a little more than 10 years ago. And that was for health reasons. I have a condition with my bladder called interstitial cystitis. And because I'm lucky, I also have ulcerative interstitial cystitis. So when I have acidic things, and alcohol is pure acid, I am in a lot of pain. So that was kind of my forcing function to not drink. Like, a drink means pain. But I also had to launch myself once I got a proper diagnosis, because I was misdiagnosed for a good decade. I started researching all kinds of alternative health because I just didn't want to take the FDA-approved drugs. I didn't like the side effects. There's only one drug that's approved for my condition, and it looks like a big experiment to me. And, you know, many pharmaceuticals, they're created to focus on one problem, and they end up causing issues in other parts of your body.
Right.
And that's one thing I do love about cannabis, is not only can be preventative medicine, but it is a whole body medicine. We have receptors for cannabis all over our bodies.
I didn't know that.
I should say inside our bodies. Yes, right. We all have an endocannabinoid system, even animals. And that's why there's such a big rise in pet products, too. They make tinctures and all kinds of treats and things for dogs and cats now. And I even know some people that are doing studies on horses and other kinds of animals.
Then I guess my next question would be, what is the difference between, say, medicinal versus the THC side of things? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.
That's actually one of the most popular questions. So medicinal versus recreational or adult use is what we'll say now. Thanks to Prop 64, it was the Adult Use Act. Coming from being, I saw the joint going around in high school in the backyard kegger parties. I also saw it going around here and there at the clubs because I was very much in the music scene. I'd here and there smoke it, but I was never a regular smoker. I did start to use it for pain management. I noticed that it made my cramps seem less of an issue. And so I would use it monthly. Then I started using it nightly. Then I started using it during the day even. So I don't think my consumption increased because my tolerance increased, really, because I've always been a pretty low tolerance person. And depending on which friends I'm hanging out with in the industry, sometimes there's a lot of puffing going on. So I ride with it. But I bring all of this up because I learned myself that there is no clear-cut line between medicinal and recreational. I mean, how do you say relieving your stress is either one or the other? You might take it for recreational purposes, but it's also preventative health care because now you're not so stressed out. Now you're laughing. What are the side effects of cannabis? I get hungry and I giggle. Sign me up.
Right. I'm not a regular user. I never had been. Once in a blue moon, happens. Somebody's got, and mostly now it's edibles because I think if I smoked, I would lose my mind. Because I hear that it's very different from like the 80s and 90s. That it's much stronger. And I even find that if I have an edible, I'm like, can I have a quarter of that? And then I feel like I need to just leave and come home and sleep. I feel like I can't enjoy it. I need to go to sleep. I don't know what that's all about, but I don't like it. I don't like the feeling. I feel like, I guess it's that paranoid feeling of feeling like you're being watched or something. I don't know.
Well, you're not alone. And I did forget to cover the CBD. But that's
we'll go back.
Important.
Yeah.
But you are definitely not alone. And that's why I like to remind people that this is very individualized medicine. I actually know people that have been smoking for 40 years, and they say the exact opposite of what you'll say. They won't touch an edible.
Really? That's interesting.
And my advice for anybody trying an edible, because I do events where I do serve, but I keep it low dose intentionally, no more than 10 milligrams. And I know to somebody who's not familiar with cannabis, 10 milligrams might not mean anything because they have no point of reference.
Right.
And that's one of my biggest challenges. But I will say 10 milligrams is what the standardized state dose is. A lot of manufacturers had to change their packaging and change their formulas to come down in the dosage, because previously, speaking from someone who used to promote a raw cannabis product, or I used to be a sales rep for one. Actually, I brought that here. It's still one of my favorite products, Awaken Topicals. A couple of years ago, the dispensaries had zero interest in this product because it doesn't get you high. They just wanted the most THC as possible, and if you didn't have it, they weren't going to buy your product. So now all these manufacturers are kind of in this like shock of like, wow, the mainstream's coming along with state regulation, and the tolerances of the new people are low. And that's what I focus on at the incipient market, the cannabis curious. And it's really running wild with the women, because women make most of the healthcare decisions for a family. A lot of the women are in charge of the bank account. Women are most likely to be diagnosed with a chronic illness. And I joined Women Grow because at the time there was no safe place to connect with other believers. There's a bunch of Facebook groups, but as far as how do you connect eye to eye, and what about this exciting industry we knew was coming, how do you meet with other entrepreneurs? And that's what Women Grow provided. It's a professional business networking, but with a focus on women, encouraging and empowering women to take leadership roles in this cannabis industry. Because there's no glass ceiling here. When else have we ever been served up a fat new industry that's really brand spanking new?
Right.
And it's not run by men.
Do you find that there are women who are, or anyone who's investing in these businesses that does not partake, or do most of the people? Oh, there are.
There's definitely the money people. The suits are coming in.
Right. Now, was that
they care about the profit?
I was under the impression that that was kind of a fear of this last vote.
Oh, definitely.
Right.
Yeah, the way Prop 64 was written did put a lot of small businesses out of business, and a lot of those businesses were female-owned too. But not only, I mean, it's a problem, and it's a problem for the small grower too. And guess who built this industry?
The small growers.
Yeah, and these small businesses that were kind of sticking their necks out and being healers. And those are the products, and those are the manufacturers and the growers that I like to highlight in my events, because it's most definitely part of the story. Let's not forget where we came from. Let's also not forget all the people that were imprisoned over this. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't even be having this conversation right now so openly.
Exactly. I do want to get back to the CBD side of things. So let's talk a little bit about that.
I'm so glad you asked, because that's one of my favorite things to educate on. And I'll take that as a segue into raw cannabis, which is non-psychoactive. And I know everybody's memorized CBD and THC, but there's so much more to the plant. Those are but 2 of over 160 cannabinoids. And like I said, we all have this endocannabinoid system. And if you look into the government patent, yes, the government has a patent on cannabis, the same government that says we're all bad people.
Oh, boy.
They have an identity crisis, I guess. They definitely know that CBDA and THCA is where it's at for healing. And for specific things, too. If someone tells me they have tremors or children with epilepsy, there's a pretty intense form of epilepsy called Gervais syndrome. And you may have heard of the strain Charlotte's Web. Sanjay Gupta did a documentary. He's done 3 now, I think, on CNN. Now, he historically was against cannabis, publicly. He went to Colorado and met this little girl that had Gervais syndrome and witnessed how this all-natural medicine with no harmful side effects except giggling and hunger changed this little girl's life. She went from 300 seizures a week to less than 10. I mean...
Wow. And
the impact on a family, not only for the patient that is going through that, but their entire family gets... brought down with that. And anyway, it changed not only Charlotte's life but her whole family's life. And then you see news stories of parents that have children with the same condition flocking, like quitting their jobs, selling their house, and moving to Colorado so they can get this medicine. That's how necessary this is. So I'm hearing stories like this, and I'm an activist, and of course I can't help it. I mean, it's wrong to go around and lie that this is bad, when in fact it's good, not even neutral, it's good for you.
Right.
Cannabis is the healthy choice. And the most healthy choice is raw cannabis, and why not get full spectrum cannabinoids, including CBD and THC. But what's really important is CBDA, which is the acidic precursor to CBD, and THCA, the acidic precursor to THC. So cannabis doesn't get you high unless you heat it up, and that's known as decarboxylation. So in the industry, you'll hear, is it raw or decarbed? This, I brought in a cannabis-infused olive oil from a company named Pappy. Trying to get my French on. And this is a strain-specific extra virgin olive oil. This is decarbed. 1 teaspoon is 5 milligrams of THC. So I'm a big advocate. One thing I do like about Prop 64 is it forced testing and it forced proper dosage. Edibles, even 4 years ago, weren't trustworthy. And the funny thing with edibles is they have to be processed by your liver too. And I learned this from a pharmaceutical company that was working on a new glaucoma drug. That's the wild card.
Oh.
So if you want consistent results all the time, they were making something that stayed in the ocular area, so it didn't get you high. You could take this at work, because first I went in there as the cannabis consultant going, what? We've been using this for glaucoma for centuries. What's different? They're like, well, this doesn't get you high. And I can see that, being an ex-corporate person that had to be alert all day, I can see people wanting this. And there is definitely a place for the pharmaceutical industry here. I'm not against it, but I would have to say that I'm a big proponent for it in its natural state. And don't let go of that dream of this being descheduled and us being in control of our own medicine. It's an herb after all.
Right.
When I lived in Long Beach and I had a raised bed garden in my backyard, that herb was right next to my basil and my rosemary and my other herbs. It's the queen of herbs because she has so many medicinal properties, but so do other plant medicines too. So I'm an advocate for all of the exiled plants of the plant kingdom. And yeah, we did cannabis wrong.
And you're here to make it right.
Right.
What would you say is the ailment that it's most used for? Like this many people have cancer and they use CBD, or, is there one that sticks out in your mind that more people are using it for?
Well, the high CBD strains are primarily being used for children, and I mean they're really great with epilepsy, and I would recommend raw for any seizures too. And raw can be used every day, any day, and really that's one thing I would like to see is people incorporating that into their diets.
Almost like a daily vitamin sort of thing.
Actually, there's a doctor named William Courtney who says cannabis is arguably the most essential vegetable on the planet. So if we juiced it every day, which by the way, the 6 plants per person would prevent that, because you really need to keep 30 plants going all the time if we were just mowing them down for your juicing.
Right.
So juicing is, everyone wants to do it, and it's such a difficult thing. I want to do it, and that caused me to do research, and I actually found a company in San Francisco named Eva Worldwide, and they are doing freeze-dried raw cannabis pills in capsule form. That's the future. And now that's the non-psychoactive side. I am so not against having a little euphoria, though. I don't want to sound like I don't have any fun.
Right. Yeah. No, I understand.
But I mean, I put it everywhere, in every orifice. And by the way, you want to bypass the liver, suppositories are gaining popularity with a lot of cancer patients. But again, it's individualized medicine, so I don't have statistics on what rates of what things are being used for what. I mean, no matter who you talk to, everybody says something different, and even the scientists, because everybody's in their own little bubble. So I do try to stay on top of all the products that are out there in the market. But, a friend that's growing, I say explore on your own too, because some of these products can be expensive.
Sure.
And the methods of making your own tincture or infused oil are pretty simple. And there's some high-tech gadgets out there now too. And through Mary Jane University, we sell a couple of them. But also there's something to be said for dropping some buds in a jar full of olive oil or alcohol. And, people make tinctures out of them.
Just infusing it.
Old world alchemy.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about growing for a second, because I can't remember where I was reading. I think I was reading somewhere. Someone was talking about using marijuana, and it would be a completely different growth experience for the plant in these warehouses with lights and that kind of thing versus either someone's backyard or in a very specific, say, grow where they're treating the plants very differently. Does that resonate with you?
Yes.
Have you heard about this? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a difference between NorCal and SoCal grows. Down here, we've had to grow indoors because it was illegal. So most of the growers down here have really perfected the indoor grow. And the indoor grow, you are like God. You control everything. It's a very pristine environment. You know there's no pesticides on your flower. Although...
How about the lighting?
Well, it's usually fluorescent and timed. And I have to say, though, at my events, because I do believe there's a spiritual connection with this plant, and I do believe all plants love sunshine. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are some greenhouses down here, but part of my activism is highlighting the fact that these small growers are getting crushed by regulation, and they're the ones that made the scene, the ones that are in Mendocino County and Humboldt County. So at my events, I always highlight a Northern California grower, and I have them come down. Hummingbird Medicinals is one of my favorite farms, and at my next event, I'm going to have Sunbolt grown, and the grower's name is Sunshine, and she makes amazing things on her own farm. She's got a dry farm that's banked by the Eel River, and she doesn't have to use fertilizer or irrigation. It's all natural. And she says there's something about that connection with the sun.
Right.
It's almost like cosmic energies infused in the plants. And I know growers that play music for their plants and sing for their plants. And I notice a difference between the growers too. And the growers and the community reference cannabis as a feminine being. It is the feminine plant that produces the bud that we smoke. And it is said there's a feminine spirit. And when you speak to some of these Northern California growers, they truly speak of her as if she's a sentient being. And I get chills.
Yeah.
I feel like I feel that way too. The Secret Life of Plants.
Right. Yeah. So very quickly, because I also want to get to your glass, let's talk about a few things on the table because people can't see them, but they can hear about them. So there's this lovely box. You know what? I'll take a picture too to put with the blog post. I'll take a picture of the items. Okay, so one of them is this Lowell Smokes. It's a beautiful box. And then you open up the box and it is pre-rolled and it has matches inside. And it's just lovely. What does something like this cost if you go to the store? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I got it for free.
Oh, samples. Another benefit for being, right? Okay, so it's Lowell Smokes, but you'll see a photo of it on the website. And then we have Awakened Topicals, Raw Cannabis Sublingual. So what is something like this doing? You're taking it during the day?
Yeah, I would take this as a daily supplement, and sublingual, for those who don't know, means under your tongue. Mm-hmm. And that is a common method of medication with cannabis tinctures. I tend to gravitate to the oil-based ones rather than the alcohol-based because, again, I have to watch my acidity.
Right.
And all of us should, really, because sugar and acid and inflammation are the cause of many diseases.
So what is the plus of using something like this on a daily basis?
Well, it could be different depending on the individual, but I enjoy this because I know that I'm getting full spectrum cannabinoids because it is raw. And you might notice a relaxing effect. I like to say it's preventative medicine, and it's feeding that endocannabinoid system with more than just one cannabinoid, CBD, or two cannabinoids. All of them. I think nature made it the way we're supposed to have it.
Right.
And I know that pharmaceutical companies and even a lot of the manufacturers are almost reverse engineering strains and packaging them up as moods. Not that I think that's wrong, but I do celebrate strain-specific things where it's unadulterated. But terpenes are something that are in nature, and some of these oils, as they're more and more refined, they've lost their terpenes, they've lost their flavor. So in the lab, those terpenes are added back. But they can't really say, oh, this is Gorilla Cookies. They're going to have to say, this is relax. They give it a mood.
Right. Okay. Well, then let's move on. Speaking of terpenes and food, the olive oil. And let's talk really quickly about High Dining Movable Feast and what kind of stuff goes on there.
Okay. That's my favorite. My events are an extension of my activism. I always start out like that so people understand why I have so many crazy layers of curation. I like to say I curate on vibration. I personally interview everybody involved in this production. I don't just read what their website says. I talk to them on the phone. I ask them their extraction practices. I even ask them what farm they get their flour from. Some of them don't want to tell me, but most of them do. And because they understand that it's important to me, they kind of get off on the fact that I'm asking these questions and I care to that level. So I like to start off there that we are trying to instill trust in our events, not only with dosage. We're not going to dose you so much you're not going to be able to move around and talk to people. And I'm also careful about anonymity of my guests. I control all of the photography. And I do plant certain people at the dinner table. You might be sitting down next to the next cannabis celebrity, and they might become your next best friend. You can also walk up to the grower and ask her questions. You can walk up to Royce Robertson of the Joshua Tree Coffee Company, who's one of our roaming educators, and you can ask him any question about coffee, because that man can geek out on coffee just as much as any biochemist will geek out on the cannabis strains. It's fascinating. So I also have people roaming about talking about desert ecology. I highlight desert artists, one of which is Kyle Simon. And he built a telescope that essentially converts light to sound. So we listen to the moon.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
That's amazing.
I know. And I love to say we blend science and magic, and there's so many layers to this that I know we don't have time to go through it all. But I'll back up to the reason why I named it Moonlight Movable Feast. My partner Lindsay and I started High Dining. I had always dreamed of doing backyard infused dinners. I had a big backyard in Long Beach. I was even talking to a chef. This was years ago. It didn't end up happening. I moved out here. The cannabis industry was growing, and I started to see this trend of the culinary world and the cannabis world meeting. And there are a few chefs that identify as cannabis chefs, and they really are experts in their field. Some of them are experts more on the medicinal side, some are more on the recreational side. The cannabis weddings are going to become a huge trend.
Goodness.
Yes, that's where the Fairie Jane
and
jewelry comes in.
And a hemp wedding dress.
Exactly. That's where we're going. We need to embrace hemp. Talk about job creation, too.
Right, yeah.
So, Moonlight Movable Feast is named such because I only do it under the full moon. And there literally are just a few opportunities where the weather is right, and the full moon lands on a Saturday, or I'll do it within 3 days. And the desert just lights up. I mean, you've seen it, but people who haven't been here before...
It's like living on the moon. On a full moon night, you're walking around in the park. It's amazing.
And this light sand just reflects the moon glow right back up, and it's just the most gorgeous thing. And although I love the stars on new moons and dark nights, I love the full moon. And you know, my little event producer mind is like, oh, you save money on no outdoor lighting. I don't need outdoor lighting at all when that moon is that bright. So I have all of these activations, and yes, the food is, I say the cannabis flowers are special guest of honor. And our chef is Sabrina Phelps. She's amazing. She's been a chef to celebrities, and she's known as the nomadic chef. She travels all over the world and is inspired by the different cuisines. And she's just such an artist with food. She's not from the Joshua Tree area, but she's the right person for this event. And I like to say at High Dining that we work with great chefs, not necessarily cannabis chefs, because I believe there's room for more chefs in this space. They may not geek out as much as some other cannabis chefs, but products like this infused olive oil or even this raw olive oil can be used as a salad dressing. In fact, our second course usually opens with a salad infused with Awakened Topicals raw cannabis oil, and it's non-psychoactive. So I intentionally dose people throughout this event too. There's layers of curation people don't even know.
Right.
So we start with alcohol. Only reason I do that is I learned my lesson the hard way. People have brought alcohol to other events or gone to bars before coming to my event. And I really want this to be about the cannabis experience. And I know some people, most of our events, our social events, are alcohol-centric. So people aren't ready to let go of that idea yet. That's why when they walk through the fires of live glass blowing, they are greeted with an arrival cocktail that's actually made by Levi Strom of Awakened Topicals, although none of his topicals are in there. He's sort of showing off his alchemy skills.
Right.
Then they receive their first course, which is roaming, because the artist compound where I do this is a feast for the eyes. I love to say this is a feast for all the senses. And the reason that it's movable is because the courses take place in different areas on the property. The first and the fourth are roaming, second and third are seated. And it's just the most magical experience, and it's intimate for a reason. I've had so many people ask me why I don't make it a big festival. I think it would lose its soul. But it's almost the same effort.
Right.
So when I left corporate America, I actually started doing an Earth Day festival in Long Beach. And that was a beast, but it was my passion. And this is almost like a mini festival. This really is the same effort, but it's limited to only 40 people.
Right, it's pretty exclusive.
It's exclusive,
and
it's
safe,
intimate,
and
it's expensive, but not really, not for everything
that you're getting.
Right. Not at all. Actually, I'm kind of losing money on it. But I can't do it any other way. The vision that I have for it is for this to truly be a fine dining upscale experience, and I don't want to settle for less. If I can't do it like that, I won't do it.
So you talked about being greeted by a live glass blower. So let's quickly talk about Fairie Jane, which is your jewelry, which is glass.
Yes.
So how were you inspired? Talk to me about that. What inspired that?
I feel that cannabis culture most definitely includes glass blowing, and a lot of the newcomers to the experience aren't aware of that because that art scene truly had to go underground. There's actually a really great movie I like to tell people about called Degenerate Art, and it explains how underground this scene was. I mean, they were fearful of prosecution, having their assets seized for making a pipe that may or may not be used for cannabis. Maybe it's just a collector's item. Maybe it's just art. I mean, so the functional art scene is its own scene. And it's coming now into fine art galleries, as it should be, because these artists are so talented and so intricate. And this movie is so interesting because it explains how the East Coast and the West Coast artists couldn't even see what each other were doing because it was so underground, and the internet wasn't everywhere. The Grateful Dead had a role in playing the Grateful Dead tour in being that marketplace and for letting artists see what other, and the color changing glass, which changes with heat and overuse, that was developed by glass blowers in this underground scene, not the fine art scene. I think that's an interesting point too. So I've been wearing a glass piece for years, and I can't tell you how many times I get stopped and people are just fascinated by it. The way the light catches it, they think it's a crystal, they just don't know what it is, but it caught their attention. So I thought, well, why not celebrate this? And this is actually an extension of my activism too, because it provides an opportunity for someone to be like, what is that?
And starts the conversation.
And it starts the conversation.
Yeah.
It also gives an appreciation for an art form that they knew nothing about because it was underground. Even though these are smaller representations of larger pieces or larger bodies of work, they're so beautiful.
Yeah,
I know people can't see
gorgeous.
this, but look inside. That's like a little window. And this was inspired by water. So even though I don't blow myself, I actually did have one lesson. I like to inspire or be the muse, and it's my intention to do different series of them. And I like to celebrate natural elements, or I never know what the next theme is going to be. I also like things that look spacey, like this one looks like a planet.
It does,
I've had others
that's pretty
that
cool.
look like galaxies or nebulas.
And she also has a ring and a tie clip and a pendant of a leaf.
Yes.
Covered in gold.
Yes.
And studded with diamonds. It's very subtle and really pretty. Well, this has been very educational, which is your goal. And I'm sure that the people listening learn some things. Where can they reach out to you if they have other questions? Can they do that?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
They can reach me through Mary Jane University.
Okay.
And also High Dining, and also Fairie Jane. I have 3 titles and 3
Okay.
emails. I'd say the easiest one is Barbie at fairiejane.com. And visit any one of those websites if any of these 3 different versions of my activism touched you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast. I want you to know how much I appreciate you taking the time to tune in. If you heard something that inspired or enlightened you, I'd love to hear about it. Send an email to desertladydiaries@gmail.com or start a discussion with other listeners at the Desert Lady Diaries Facebook page. Next week, I'm breaking new ground here on the podcast with a mother-daughter conversation with Shannon Swanson and Destiny Briggs of Joshua Tree. The conversation covers DJ's upcoming journey to college in Seattle and their own up-close and personal experience with some of the dangers of the desert. And if you're enjoying this podcast and find value in it, I hope you'll go to the Desert Lady Diaries Facebook page, desertladydiaries.com, and click on the yellow donate button and make a donation. The donations help keep the podcast ad-free, keep it community-supported, and also covers the logistics of keeping the podcast going. Thanks so much for listening.